Russia is reportedly importing gasoline from India as Ukrainian attacks on its energy infrastructure trigger fuel shortages. Reports from industry sources say at least 60,000 metric tons of gasoline have been shipped from India to Russia. Moscow is believed to be looking to import hundreds of thousands of tons more each month, including from Belarus. Fuel shortages across Russia have led to rationing, long queues at filling stations and record price increases. President Putin has acknowledged that Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries are causing problems in some regions, but he claims Russia is dealing with them. For Ukraine, the shortages are proof that their deep strike campaign is having an effect beyond the battlefield, exerting pressure on Moscow's war economy and bringing Putin's war closer to ordinary Russians. Here is President Zelenskyy speaking this week.
Russians themselves, standing in lines for gasoline in different regions of Russia, can actually see that this three-day war of theirs has already been going on for a fifth year, in such a way that even an oil state, a gas station as Russia used to be called, now has a gasoline shortage. This is a direct consequence of the war.
Maximilian Hess is a foreign policy consultant and founder of Emmetena Advisory. That's a political risk firm. He joins us from London. Welcome to the day. So what does it say about the effect of Ukraine's deep strikes against Russian infrastructure that one of the world's biggest oil producers is now reportedly importing gasoline from India?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think it really shows how much Ukraine has been able to develop its technological capabilities, its targeting capabilities across a range of weaponry, including most significantly drones, but also most recently we've seen it use apparently the first ballistic missile Kyiv has developed. And it's really used this to target Russia's energy and bring the war costs domestically to Russia. It's a sea change in Kyiv's approach over the last few months, and one that really raises the stakes for the war within Russia itself.
And so you see this to be this drone technology to be making a substantive difference. This is not wishful thinking or rah-rah.
I think it makes a substantive difference to the reach of the war and to its impact within Russia. Tragically, I don't think it makes a substantive difference to Russia's willingness to sue for peace in the war that it started, because Vladimir Putin is a unilateral decision maker on that front, and he has shown no signs of being willing to negotiate, let alone to bring down his maximalist demands.
OK, so the point then of these attacks, is it to inflict damage to Russians at home rather than on the battlefield?
I think that there's 3 points to these attacks. One is to raise the cost to the war for the Kremlin. If it has to import fuel, it no longer is able to produce in the same levels. That increases the fiscal cost of the Kremlin. Second is psychological, to demonstrate to Russia and Russians that this war that their president started is something that is having kinetic impacts on their daily lives, even significant distances from the battlefield. And then third is to demonstrate to Ukraine's Western allies that despite the still bleak outlook on the front lines itself, with Russia making slow and slowing further gains at the loss of tens of thousands of men on a monthly basis, that Kyiv still has the ability to innovate and to show that it has the ability to find new ways to bring that pressure, which is important to ensuring that Western financing and that Western military aid remains.
Let's talk about the one-man show that President Putin is running, because this week saw the Russian president going on TV and acknowledging the problems that Ukraine's strikes are now producing. That sounds like it's significant.
Tragically, I would have to disagree with you on that. I think Putin engages in these publicly televised displays of authority to show that he remains focused on the war, to show that he is still in charge, having that strongman image of him looking over maps and being able to discuss the battlefield is really important to his self-perception and the perception that he has tried to create within Russia. It doesn't mean that Vladimir Putin is going to change his approach in any way, and that's what is really needed. I think the only things that can realistically bring about an end to this war on some kind of foreseeable timeline are a change of mind and heart from Vladimir Putin, or real further pressure combined with these Ukrainian drones in terms of sanctions and economic pressure that builds up domestic political opposition to Putin, both on the street and amongst elites.
Okay, that's really interesting. Dig deeper for us, because in most democracies, governments would be very sensitive about reports of rationing, queues at filling stations and spikes in petrol prices. So we're misreading the fact that Putin has chosen to go on TV and acknowledge that. So you see that as Putin saying, this has happened, I'm still in control. He's taking that as a measure of strength rather than being under pressure.
Yes, exactly. And, I think we should really acknowledge just how much pressure this has brought on parts of Russia, as well as in particular occupied Crimea, where the fuel supplies have been most impacted, as well as the supplies of other goods from the rest of Russia, as Kyiv has put pressure on that so-called land bridge of occupied territory that Russia uses to supply it, in addition to the bridge that Vladimir Putin built. And for Russia and Russians, Crimea has this siege image. Sevastopol is the hero city twice over for its role in withstanding sieges. That's the military capital of Crimea, Sevastopol. And Putin would be very happy to engage in evacuations of civilians there. He would tie that into that historical imagery. What he can't do is to acknowledge that there's a threat to continued Russian control of that territory,
Right.
because that would be a weakening compared to that historic imagery.
Okay, let's zoom right out now and ask a sort of a separate but slightly different question. Because when you look at Russia on the back foot in this war against Ukraine, when you look at the might of the US military getting nowhere in Iran, we've seen in this last week the UK scrapping its next-generation destroyer fleet for drones. It's now looking like war has changed. It seems that bigger in a very short time frame isn't necessarily the best anymore.
No, I think it really has changed, and it has changed on sort of three fronts, I guess we could say. One, and these are the three fronts that are crucial to the war's ultimate outcome. The one front is the battlefield itself. Those front lines where we spoke, there's very little change in terms of recent control. Drones have taken over the policing and the controlling of those front lines, and they form a role that trenches kind of used to do. The second is on that long-range warfare and that ability to engage in disruptive attacks, whether that be in drones or other forms of asymmetric warfare, targeting of pipelines, Iran's targeting of the Strait of Hormuz in that case, seeking those economic choke points. And then the third has been the use of legal and sanctions type measures to try to raise some of those economic costs there as well, which are also hugely important, but have fallen a little bit on the back foot in terms of the Western agenda. There's still a lot more that could be done. And while one of those three fronts, the battlefield, is certainly a stalemate. Two, Kyiv has some advantages, but let's not forget that there are daily missile strikes causing significant human casualties amongst civilians within Ukraine. And then third is that front on the sanctions and the sort of tools of legal and economic warfare. And that's where still a lot more can be done.
That's a fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Maximilian Hess from Emmetena Advisory.